Laid off on the same day, my son mocked me for never going to college. The fluorescent office lights flickered like a bad omen. Conrad, 52, accountant by trade, still clutched the pristine company ID badge he'd kept for years. Sometimes life's ironies come wrapped in the coldest packages ever had. One hit you out of nowhere. It was Thanksgiving, and the house was filled with the comforting aroma of roasting turkey, a scent that usually brought warmth and togetherness. But tonight, the usual peace felt fragile, as if it were balanced on the edge of a knife. I stood in the kitchen, carefully arranging the side dishes on the table, my hands steady, but my mind swirling with the weight of years past. The clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation floated from the dining room. But I kept to myself, retreating into the quiet space that always felt safest. The old coffee mug sat gleaming on the table, untouched and pristine, a relic of stability. A small comfort in the storm that was to come. It had belonged to my father, passed down as a symbol of our family's endurance through tougher times. I glanced at it now, unaware that it was about to become a silent witness to a fracture in the foundation of all I had known. My name is Conrad, an accountant by trade, and in my early 50s, I've always been the quiet one in the family, not much for words, preferring to let numbers and facts speak their own truth. Tonight was supposed to be no different, just a traditional Thanksgiving gathering in our suburban Pittsburgh home. But things have never been simple when it comes to my family, especially with Rhett, my older sister, and the property owner, who holds the keys to more than just the house. As I moved to carry the last dish to the table, I heard Rhett's sharp voice cutting through the laughter, her words dripping with sarcasm. "Conrad, is that the best you can do?" "I've had better dinners at the office cafeteria." Her eyes sparkled with a cruel amusement as others around the table chuckled nervously. I forced a smile, reminding myself that this was nothing new, her way of undermining me, keeping me in my place. My mother, fragile and nostalgic, sat quietly beside her, her gaze distant but tinged with sorrow. The room buzzed with family chatter, but my attention was suddenly drawn to a stark black envelope slipped quietly onto the table amidst the clutter of plates and glasses. The official seal, embossed on its surface, glistened ominously under the overhead light. I reached out, the weight of the envelope heavier than expected in my hands. As I broke the seal, silence seemed to descend, drowning out the usual noise. I unfolded the crisp paper inside and scanned the words, each line hitting harder than the last eviction notice. The letter was clear: by the end of the month, I was to vacate the home I had lived in for decades. The room around me seemed to blur, voices fading into the background as the gravity of the situation took hold. Despite the chaos erupting in my mind, my eyes kept returning to the coffee mug on the table. It sat there untouched and whole, an emblem of the life I was about to lose. My hand trembled slightly as I set the letter down beside it, the tremor betraying the calm I tried to maintain. A quiet storm was brewing, and this was only the beginning. The old mug, once a symbol of comfort, now stood as a poignant reminder that stability is often more fragile than it appears. And as I looked around the table at the faces of my family, some mocking, some indifferent, I realized this. Thanksgiving would mark the end of one chapter and the painful start of another. The letter's official seal felt cold and unyielding beneath my fingertips, the black envelope heavy with finality. My shaking hands were barely steady enough to hold it, a stark contrast to the calm I tried to project to those around me. The chatter continued, but I was already retreating into the silence inside, where the reality of what lay ahead was impossible to ignore. The coffee mug caught the light, its familiar glaze unmarred. It was a small, stubborn piece of the past, defiant against the fracture spreading through the room. And as my gaze lingered on it, I vowed silently to fight for what it represented: home dignity, and the remnants of a family I wasn't ready to give up on. The room buzzed with uneasy energy as the news settled like a shadow over the table. Rhett's smirk widened, savoring the moment, while my mother's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. I remained seated, the eviction letter heavy on the table, my fingers brushing the rim of the coffee mug. It was a quiet defiance, a still point amid the gathering storm. And in that moment, I realized the battle ahead would be as much about holding on to my sense of self as it was about the house itself. The smell of roasting turkey mingled with the bitter taste of betrayal. Thanksgiving had turned from celebration to reckoning, and I was left to wonder how the meal I prepared with care had become the backdrop to my undoing. My hand trembled slightly as I set the letter down, eyes fixed on the coffee mug, a silent witness to the fracture in our family and the fight to come. The morning after Thanksgiving arrived quietly, its chill seeping through the windows of my kitchen. I sat alone at the worn wooden table, the eviction letter resting unopened on the counter, a silent reminder of the storm brewing just beneath the surface of my life. Outside, the early winter sun cast pale light over the suburban streets of Pittsburgh, but inside, the warmth I'd hoped to find in family was replaced by a cold tension I couldn't shake. The old coffee mug that had been my anchor during the chaotic dinner now sat before me, and that morning, a faint crack appeared along its rim, barely noticeable at first, but unmistakably there. It was as if the mug, a symbol of the stability I clung to, was mirroring the fractures spreading through my own world. I reached out almost unconsciously, fingertips brushing over the crack, a small shiver running through me. The bills lay scattered across the kitchen counter like a cruel reminder of everything I was fighting against. Medical expenses for Mom's declining health had been mounting relentlessly, and insurance companies seemed intent on denying every claim. Each notice was a dagger: late fees, denied coverages, inflated costs, and no matter how many numbers I crunched or appeals, I wrote the balance only grew. My accountant's logic told me to prepare for the worst, but my heart refused to give up just yet. Emails pinged quietly on my phone, each one more discouraging than the last. Property management was sending curt notices about rent increases, their tone cold and businesslike, lacking any hint of empathy. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly as my thoughts swirled. Rent hikes, now eviction looming. How had things spiraled so far beyond what I could control? Memories of past family tensions floated in and out of focus. Rhett's cutting remarks, the years of subtle power plays, disguised as concern, and the way her presence lingered like a shadow, even when she wasn't physically there. It was as though every interaction, every decision had been carefully designed to isolate me, to push me out of the picture like an inconvenient truth. The coffee mug became my unexpected confidant in those moments of solitude. Its crack widened imperceptibly as I lifted it to my lips, the warmth of the coffee contrasting sharply with the cold reality settling around me. The sound of porcelain scraping against the counter felt like a sharp echo of the growing pressure fractures appearing, not just in ceramic, but in relationships and stability alike. I pulled up my laptop, fingers hovering uncertainly over the keyboard before I began to type. The email had to be measured, careful, too aggressive, and it might close doors, too timid, and it would invite further hardship. I crafted each sentence with precision, disputing the rent increase and citing legal protections I'd researched late into the night. As I typed, my fingers brushed once more against the cracked mug, the fragile vessel grounding me amidst the uncertainty. Finally, I hit send, the soft click resonating louder than I expected. The message was out now, floating somewhere in the digital ether, a small act of defiance against a tide of pressure and disregard. Yet as the screen refreshed, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what might come next. Would they respond with understanding, or would the reply push me closer to the edge? The cracked coffee mug sat silently beside my keyboard, its fracture a physical testament to the strain I was under. It was a reminder that sometimes even the strongest surfaces begin to show their vulnerabilities. And as I watched the screen waiting for a reply, the fragile crack seemed to stretch further, mirroring the widening gap between who I was and the life that threatened to unravel around me. The bills were smudged and worn. Their ink faded from the countless times I'd studied them, searching for errors or overlooked details. The insurance denial letters were particularly cruel, official, yet indifferent to the personal toll behind the numbers. Each one made my chest tighten, a physical ache that no calculation could soothe. The email I sent was longer than I'd planned, filled with citations from tenant protection laws and carefully worded appeals to reason. My tone was respectful, but firm, a balance I hoped would convey both my desperation and my resolve. I imagined Rhett reading it, her eyes narrowing at my audacity. But this was my stand, a quiet but necessary rebellion. Throughout the morning, I revisited the mug repeatedly, the crack a small but constant reminder that I couldn't keep pretending everything was intact. It was a symbol now not just of the home I was fighting to keep, but of the strength required to face what lay ahead. Outside, the winter wind whispered through the bare branches, and inside, I was left with the fragile coffee mug, the unopened eviction letter, and the mounting uncertainty that defined my days. The fight was only beginning, and I knew that whatever came next would demand more from me than I had yet given. The winter chill had settled deep into the streets of Pittsburgh by early 2018, making every breath outside the diner feel sharp and brittle. Inside the warm, familiar walls of O'Malley's diner, the clinking of dishes and murmurs of conversation created a comforting backdrop to a meeting I hadn't expected, but desperately needed. I was nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee when Edgar walked in. The man who had once been my mentor and a steady voice of reason through countless storms. Edgar's presence filled the room quietly but unmistakably. His old watch, scratched and worn from decades of use, caught the light as he moved, a reliable heartbeat amidst the chaos of the world. The watch seemed almost symbolic, reminding me that endurance and patience often outlast the sharpest storms. I felt the weight of the past months settle into my chest as I opened up to him, my frustrations spilling out like the steam rising from my cup. I talked about the eviction letter, the mounting medical bills, the strain of family tensions, and the gnawing uncertainty that seemed to erode my resolve. Edgar listened carefully, nodding at times, his eyes reflecting a quiet understanding that words alone couldn't convey. He shared stories of resilience, times when he had faced similar battles during his own career as an engineer. The setbacks, the long nights, the small victories that came only after persistence. His voice was steady and calm. Each story a brick in a foundation of hope he was helping me rebuild. "You're not alone in this, Conrad," he said firmly, his hand resting briefly on mine. "But you need a plan, a solid one. Emotional strength only carries you so far. You need to formalize your response, get legal support, rally the community. These things matter." We began discussing practical steps. Edgar emphasized the importance of gathering and organizing evidence, emails from the property management official documents, records of payments. "Every piece counts," he reminded me. "If you're going to fight this, you fight smart." As he spoke, I felt a quiet determination stirring inside me. The mentor's faith in my ability wasn't just encouragement, it was a call to action. The weight of hopelessness started to lift, replaced by a resolve as steady as Edgar's ticking watch. Before leaving, Edgar handed me a worn, dog-eared notebook, its pages filled with handwritten notes, contact information for legal aid groups, and advice from others who had weathered similar storms. The ink was faded in places, but the message was clear: I was not on this journey alone. I slipped the notebook into my coat pocket, a small flicker of hope igniting within me. Outside, the cold winter wind continued to blow, but inside, beneath the diner's buzzing neon signs and clinking dishes, I felt a warmth that hadn't been there for a long time. For the first time in months, I was ready to face what came next with patience, endurance, and a plan. The diner was alive with quiet energy, the scrape of silverware against plates, the soft murmur of voices, the faint hiss of the coffee machine. Edgar's watch ticked steadily on his wrist, a metronome keeping time in a world that often felt out of sync. His presence grounded me, reminding me that even the most worn and scratched things can still serve a purpose. As we spoke, I caught a glimpse of the waitress bustling between tables, her cheerful demeanor a stark contrast to the heaviness I carried. The patrons around us seemed oblivious to the gravity of our conversation, their lives moving on as mine was at a crossroads. The notebook in my pocket felt like a talisman. Its pages, filled with scribbles and phone numbers, represented a lifeline, proof that resilience could be planned, not just hoped for. Edgar's mentorship wasn't just about advice, it was a tangible support system I could lean on. This meeting marked a turning point. I was no longer just a man overwhelmed by circumstances. I was a man with a strategy backed by experience and community. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but I was ready to take the first steps. Outside, the sky remained gray-heavy with the promise of more snow, but inside, the clinking dishes and the steady ticking of a worn watch marked the rhythm of a new beginning. The mentor's words echoed in my mind, steady and sure. I folded the notebook carefully and looked at Edgar, gratitude filling my chest. "Thank you," I said simply. He smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "We'll get through this, one step at a time." And with that, I left the diner feeling a little less alone and a lot more prepared. Emails pinged relentlessly on my laptop as winter tightened its grip on Pittsburgh in early 2021. Each new message felt like another hammer blow to the fragile structure I'd been trying to hold together, much like the battered coffee mug sitting on my cluttered kitchen counter, chipped and held together by a strip of yellowing tape. It was a small, potent symbol of how my world was slowly unraveling. The mug had once been pristine, a gift from my mother, that sat untouched during the Thanksgiving dinner when the eviction notice arrived. Now it bore the scars of countless tense mornings and late nights, its once smooth surface fractured and repaired, much like the precarious stability of my life. Rhett's name kept flashing across my screen, her emails sharp and unforgiving. She was no longer just my older sister. In these messages, she had become a direct antagonist, relentless, demanding, and utterly uncompromising. The rent was tripled with threats veiled thinly beneath legal jargon and cold reminders of her authority as the property owner. Her tone was icy, each sentence another crack in my resolve. The weight of those words pressed heavily on my chest as I stared at the latest demand. I grasped the coffee mug tightly, the tape pressing against my fingers, a reminder that even the strongest facades could only endure so much. In search of guidance, I reached out to Benjamin, a sharp attorney with a reputation for tenacity. Our conversations were terse but purposeful, each exchange building tension as the legal contours of my predicament became clearer. Benjamin's advice was affirm, set boundaries, document everything, and prepare for a fight. He emphasized the importance of a formal lease agreement, something that could provide me with some protection and clarity in this escalating battle. Between emails and calls, my mind drifted to flashbacks of Rhett's darker days, whispered rumors of gambling debts, late-night arguments with our mother, and the slowly fracturing family ties that had long simmered beneath the surface. Those memories lent a bitter edge to the current conflict. This was not just about money, but a deep emotional fracture. One evening, as the snow drifted softly outside my modest apartment window, I read another threatening email. My fingers trembled slightly as I wrapped them around the cracked mug. The chipped rim dug into my skin, a physical echo of the emotional pain I felt. Despite the pressure, I resolved to stand firm. With Benjamin's guidance, I drafted and signed a formal lease agreement that clearly outlined the terms and boundaries I was willing to accept. It was a small victory, but significant. It was me reclaiming a measure of control. Yet just as I began to breathe a bit easier, Rhett's final salvo landed an explicit threat of eviction if I failed to comply. The message was chilling, setting the stage for a legal showdown that I knew would test every ounce of my strength and resolve. The taped coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter, silent witness to the storm brewing around me. It was more than a vessel for coffee. Now it was a symbol of a man pushed to his limits, but still holding on, fragile, yet unbroken. As I closed my laptop, the room seemed colder than ever. Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside I braced myself for the fight ahead, knowing that my quiet resistance was only just beginning. Around me, the apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in as the digital ping of messages refused to stop. Screenshots of emails with threatening language, scanned legal notices, and typed text messages cluttered my inbox. A constant reminder that this was no longer a private family dispute, but a battle fought on multiple fronts. The coffee mug, taped and cracked, caught the weak light of the kitchen lamp, reflecting the worn edges of my patience. Each crack symbolized not just physical damage, but the relentless pressure of mounting medical bills, strained family bonds, and the looming threat of homelessness. Benjamin's voice over the phone was steady and reassuring, but I could hear the underlying tension. "Conrad, you need to document every interaction. Rhett's behavior isn't just harsh, it's potentially unlawful. We have a case, but you have to be meticulous." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. The legal documents I now held were crisp and formal, yet they felt like a thin shield against an oncoming storm. And then there was Rhett somewhere in her world of debts and power plays, wielding control like a weapon against me. I thought back to my mother, frail and nostalgic, caught somewhere between us, a silent witness to the family's slow unraveling. The chapter of my life once filled with quiet hope and stability was now fractured, much like the coffee mug. I gripped a fragile symbol taped together but never fully restored. The eviction threat hung heavy in the air, a shadow looming over every thought. But as I stared at the mug, I knew that while the cracks ran deep, I was not ready to break. The emails had become a relentless tide, but within the chaos, the simple act of signing that lease was a lifeline, proof that I was still fighting, still holding on. And as winter tightened its grip on Pittsburgh, I prepared for the battles yet to come with a cracked mug in hand and resolve in my heart. The courtroom was a hushed cathedral of tension, the only sounds the crisp rustle of papers and the occasional shuffle of feet. It was late 2021, a cold winter morning in Pittsburgh, but inside the building, the chill was nothing compared to the frost settling between Rhett and me. Today was the day my eviction fight would reach its climax, the first part of what I knew would be a double-edged battle. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, my eyes occasionally drifting to the torn family photo, resting on my office desk back home. That photo, frayed and folded with time, was a silent testament to what was truly at stake. Not just a roof over my head, but the remnants of a fractured family trying to find its way back from the brink. Benjamin, my attorney, stood confidently at the front, his voice steady and precise as he laid out our case. He presented contracts, emails, and meticulous rent payment records, each piece of evidence carefully chosen to demonstrate my commitment and Rhett's unreasonable demands. His words cut through the sterile courtroom air like a scalpel, exposing the inconsistencies and desperation behind Rhett's actions. I recalled moments from the past, the Thanksgiving dinner that spiraled into chaos. Rhett's biting remarks and the weight of the eviction notice. These memories surged quietly within me, fueling a calm yet unyielding strength. I was no longer just a man fighting for his home. I was standing for dignity, for fairness, for the right to be heard. Rhett's testimony was next. The confident facade she had maintained so far began to crack as she stumbled over questions about her mounting gambling debts and the pressure that had driven her to tripling the rent. The judge's sharp inquiries laid bare her desperation, and the tension in the courtroom thickened with each faltering word. As the judge leaned forward, his expression measured and discerning, I felt a flicker of hope. The ruling was delivered partial victory. The judge ordered a fair rent adjustment and postponed the eviction, acknowledging my right to remain, but signaling that the battle was far from over. Rhett's glare burned with defiance from across the courtroom. It was a look that promised this fight wasn't ending today, that more storms lay ahead. The torn family photo lingered in my mind's eye, a symbol of what had been lost and what still could be salvaged. In that cold courthouse room, beneath the weight of law and emotion, I took a breath and braced for the next chapter of this fight. Benjamin's confident tone reverberated through the courtroom as he presented our case with unwavering clarity. Every document he laid out was a brick in the wall, protecting my right to stay. Contracts signed in good faith, emails showing my attempts to negotiate fairly, and rent payment records proving I wasn't shirking responsibility. His voice was a calm anchor amidst the tempest. Rhett sat across from me, her posture rigid, her eyes darting nervously as Benjamin's words cut through the room. When it was her turn to speak, the cracks in her story began to show. Questions about her gambling debts made her falter, her voice losing some of its usual sharpness. The judge, with a practiced eye, pressed for details, highlighting the desperation behind her harsh demands. My mind wandered briefly to that torn family photo back at home, a picture of my mother, Rhett, and me, smiles frozen in time. Now torn and worn by years of conflict. It reminded me why this wasn't just about money or property. It was about reclaiming respect and mending old wounds. The courtroom held its breath as the judge delivered his ruling partial favor to me. A fair rent was ordered and eviction was put on hold. It was a win, but tempered by the knowledge that the fight was ongoing. Rhett's defiant glare was a silent vow of continued resistance. I felt the weight of that promise settle over me, but also a quiet resolve. The cracks in the mug, the torn photo, these symbols of fragility and endurance, were not just relics of the past. They were reminders that even in brokenness there could be strength. As the gavel came down, I knew this was just the first act in a longer struggle, one that would test everything I had: patience, courage, and the quiet strength I had always carried within. The rustling of papers, the shifting of feet, the low murmur of whispers, all faded as Benjamin's voice rose with purpose. He laid out the evidence with the precision of a seasoned chess player anticipating each move Rhett would make. Her shaky testimony revealed the underbelly of her financial woes, and the judge's pointed questions peeled back the layers of pretense. I watched Rhett closely. The confident woman who had tormented me was now visibly vulnerable, the weight of her debts and desperation betraying her. The courtroom's atmosphere thickened as the judge weighed the facts. His measured decision ordering fair rent and postponing eviction was both a relief and a call to arms. It acknowledged my fight, but underscored that this was far from over. Rhett's glare, sharp and unyielding, promised more battles ahead. Yet I felt a surge of calm. The torn family photo and the cracked mug were symbols, not just of pain, but of resilience, reminders that even in fracture there is hope. As I gathered my things, the cold winter light filtering through the courthouse windows felt less biting. The fight was only beginning, but I was ready to face it with quiet strength and a determination forged through hardship. Back home, the coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter, its once pristine surface now marred by strips of silver duct tape. It was an imperfect patchwork, much like the state of my life, fragile, worn, but stubbornly resilient. The mug's battered presence was a daily reminder that sometimes survival isn't about looking flawless. It's about holding together despite the cracks. Next to it lay Tyler's handmade get well card, folded carefully with bright, uneven letters spelling out hope and encouragement. The card's cheerful colors clashed with the dull gray of the tape, yet the two together symbolized the fragile balance between hardship and healing. It was early spring 2022, and the soft light filtering through the kitchen window lent a gentle warmth to the room. Outside, the chill of winter was giving way to renewal, a fitting backdrop for the tentative peace growing inside our home. Tyler, my son, had been making steady progress after surgery. Watching him regain strength was a quiet victory that buoyed my spirits more than any courtroom win could. His laughter, soft and genuine, filled the rooms and chased away the lingering shadows of tension. In those moments, surrounded by the quiet hum of a home slowly stitching itself back together, I found a renewed sense of purpose. Tyler's bravery in the face of pain was a mirror reflecting my own struggles, a reminder that endurance is often born in the smallest, most tender moments. Then unexpectedly, Rhett came to the door. She was different now. Humility softened her usual sharp edges, and her eyes held a flicker of remorse. She didn't expect immediate forgiveness. Rather, she extended an olive branch, a gesture towards something neither of us dared name yet. I listened carefully as she spoke, her words cautious but sincere. It was clear she was wrestling with her own regrets, and though the wounds ran deep, I sensed a genuine desire to bridge the chasm that had grown between us. Setting firm boundaries, I made it clear that rebuilding trust would be a slow process, yet I was willing to allow space for tentative family healing. After all, even the strongest walls must sometimes admit a crack for light to enter. Later, in the quiet of my study, I reflected on the lessons learned through this ordeal. The eviction fight, the fractured family ties, the battles both legal and personal, all had shaped a new strength within me. It was not the brash confidence of youth, but a quiet, enduring resilience. That evening, Tyler called me the strongest man I know. His words, simple yet profound, settled deep in my heart. In that moment, I understood that strength is not about never breaking. It's about how you hold yourself together when everything else seems to fall apart. As I set the card beside the patched mug, I wondered silently if true peace was possible. Not just the absence of conflict, but a genuine reconciliation that could heal old wounds and foster new beginnings. The room was still save for the soft ticking of the clock and the distant chirping of spring birds outside. Hope lingered in the air, fragile but persistent, much like the duct-taped mug that sat steadfast on my kitchen counter. The soft chime of Edgar's old watch broke the quiet hum of the local diner, a gentle reminder that healing, much like time itself, is a slow and steady process. The familiar ticking filled the air as steam curled from our coffee mugs, mingling with the muted clatter of plates and distant conversation. It was late autumn of 2022, the chill creeping in outside, reflected in the golden hues of fallen leaves scattered beyond the diner's fogged windows. On the table between us rested a faded photo, Conrad and Edgar, years ago seated in this very diner. Younger faces caught in a moment of camaraderie. The image was worn at the edges but rich with memories, a silent testament to the enduring bond between mentor and mentee. I glanced at Edgar, his eyes reflecting the weight of all we'd been through since that eviction notice disrupted my life years before. Our battle with Rhett had left scars not only on me, but on the whole community. The courtroom dramas and personal struggles now felt like chapters in a larger story, one of resilience, growth, and collective strength. "We've come a long way," Edgar said quietly, his voice steady and measured, much like the man himself. "But the fight isn't just about you anymore. It's about the people who face similar battles every day." That sparked an idea I'd been mulling over, but hesitant to act on: a neighborhood fund dedicated to helping families caught in crises, whether from financial hardship, health emergencies, or eviction threats. The fund would be a tangible way to transform our struggles into support, turning pain into progress. As we talked, Marcus, a longtime neighbor and local shop owner, joined us. His face carried the warmth of someone deeply rooted in the community. He shared stories of neighbors rallying around each other in times of need, of small acts of kindness, knitting a safety net beneath those at risk. "There's strength in unity," Marcus said, nodding toward the photo on the table. "Your fight inspired a lot of folks. Now it's time we build something bigger together." Inspired by Marcus's words and Edgar's steady presence, I found renewed purpose beyond my personal battles. The idea of giving back, of channeling our experience into helping others, breathed new life into me. Soon after, community members began to gather: neighbors, friends, even strangers who'd heard our story. They pledged their support for the fund, filling out handwritten cards with promises of donations, volunteering, and spreading awareness. The room buzzed with quiet hope, a palpable energy that transcended the hardships we'd faced. The ticking of Edgar's watch was the steady heartbeat beneath it all, a rhythm of persistence and patience. Just as the meeting was winding down, a letter arrived for me, slipped under the diner's door. Its embossed seal caught the light, and I recognized it immediately as an invitation to speak at a local charity event. The invitation was a call to share our journey to amplify the message of resilience and community. I tucked the letter carefully into my coat pocket, a flicker of anticipation lighting my thoughts. The fight that had once felt isolating was now blossoming into something larger, a movement fueled by shared stories and collective hope. As Edgar and I prepared to leave, I glanced once more at that faded photo. The faces frozen in time seemed to smile back, reminding me that healing is not a destination, but a journey, one best traveled with others by your side. The coffee steam swirled upward, mingling with the autumn air, carrying with it the quiet promise of new beginnings. Standing at the front of the community center, I held the now repaired coffee mug in my hands. Its rim, once cracked and fragile, caught the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, gleaming like a promise renewed. The mug had become more than a simple vessel for coffee. It was a symbol of endurance, of the fractures and mending that had marked my journey these past years. Today it stood as a testament to new beginnings. The room was warm with the hum of conversation and the gentle rustle of chairs, as friends, family, and neighbors gathered for the charity event. The air was thick with hope and shared purpose. Faces both familiar and new turned toward me, expectant and kind. Among them, Rhett sat quietly, toward the back, supportive yet distant, a reminder of the complicated path we had traveled. I took a deep breath, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint floral notes from spring blossoms outside. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady, but laced with emotion. "This mug you see in my hands, it's been through a lot. It was whole then broken, and now it's been carefully repaired. Much like my family, much like our community." As I shared the story of my eviction fight, the late nights spent poring over legal documents, the tension with family, and the quiet moments of hope fostered by my mentor Edgar and my son Tyler's unwavering support. I saw eyes glisten with recognition and empathy. It was more than my story. It was a shared struggle for dignity, for stability, for belonging. The funds raised at this event, I explained, would go directly to helping families facing medical and housing crises, those caught in the very same storm I had weathered. The community's collective strength had transformed pain into purpose, fracturing isolation into solidarity. Rhett's presence, though quiet, spoke volumes. The distance between us had narrowed, boundaries respected, yet softened. There was no grand reconciliation, but a cautious acknowledgement of growth and change. As the last words of my speech echoed applause, swelled through the room, warm, heartfelt, and sustained. I raised the coffee mug high, its repaired rim gleaming as a beacon of resilience and hope. The crowd's faces reflected a spectrum of emotions, gratitude, resolve, and quiet celebration. For a moment, time seemed to pause. The mug, a fragile but unyielding symbol of the journey from fracture to healing. I glanced across the sea of hopeful faces, feeling the weight of what we had accomplished together and the promise of what still lay ahead. The journey was far from over. Life would continue to test us, challenge us to rise again. But in this moment, surrounded by community and strengthened by love, I found peace. The mug, once broken, was whole again, a perfect emblem for a future built on endurance, forgiveness, and the strength of connection. As the event drew to a close and warm conversations blossomed around me, I tucked the mug carefully into my bag, a cherished reminder. The repaired coffee mug would always remind me that even the deepest cracks can be mended, not by erasing the break, but by embracing it, honoring the scars, and moving forward together. Outside, the early spring sun bathed Pittsburgh in golden light, a quiet witness to the resilience of a man, a family, and a community determined to heal and thrive. The journey continues, but for now, there was hope, and that was enough. The repaired coffee mug, now shining softly in the warm glow of the setting sun, reminded me that even the most fragile things can be made whole again. Life has a way of breaking us down, only to offer unexpected chances for healing and growth. Justice isn't just about winning a fight. It's about rebuilding trust and finding strength in community. Sometimes the cracks we fear most are the very places where light finds its way in. If you've ever faced hardship or loss, remember, there's always a path forward and waiting to be discovered. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Feel free to share your story or thoughts below. I'd love to hear them.